I think that we will have Commissioner Walker here as well. No, he's out today. Okay, all right. I did not realize that. All right, as you can see on the agenda, we will do a presentation from Public Works and beautification, and then we have 5 proclamations, and then we have an equalization hearing. We'll pass that. That takes us to 3B1 on resolutions.
All right, 3D1 is adding the city's property, essentially, that is just kind of southwest of George Higgins Boulevard and southeast of George Higgins Boulevard and southwest of Lakewater Drive to a brownfield area that was already created for the Florida Towel site. This is something that the Lakewater Development Company folks have requested in order to prepare that property for development, ultimate sale to the developer. I didn't get that in the slideshow, but this is the property here.
Yes,
It is in there? Okay. Okay. So towards the end of your agenda item, you'll see what the property is. The area below Prospect Street, or used to be called Martin Luther King, is already in the brownfield area. We're adding that triangle to the top.
Right there.
Any questions on that one?
Any questions on that? Okay, next.
Next is a continuation of a matter that came before you, I believe, back in December. This is the screen wall for the Bay Street substation. It came before you to approve Waller construction for that project, and after looking at the materials that were going to be incorporated into that, it was all stucco. There was a desire on the commission's part to reassess that, to add brick to that instead. And so that's what's happened. Waller's come back with a new bid. The original low bid was Waller at $249,850. They've come back with a bid for an all brick wall at $397,112. Brian, can you show what that?
Yeah, so Elise is here.
Okay. I'm here. Yes, I am.
Okay, Elise.
You have any questions? Just as City Attorney Davis mentioned, the commission had questions about the screen wall and those materials. There were some concerns about the stucco. And so initially we were at about $250,000 on that estimate. And if you could, Brian, the next slide, that's a visual of what it would have looked like. The block would actually be covered in texture stucco about a ½ inch. That was the original proposal. But we went back and looked at it, removed the stucco, and then replaced those quantities with brick so that we would not have the same concerns. And that, of course, is a change order, so it's a cost increase, and it takes that total price to $397,000. So, I know that there were concerns or maybe just some questions about why we didn't go with just a split face block wall. And unfortunately, when we entered into the agreement, fortunately, when we entered into the agreement with Framework, we had some stipulations in there about collaborating to make this happen. And so in building out this particular neighborhood, the goal is to create a field that is more walkable and interconnected for pedestrians that will ultimately end up going from east to west and back to Massachusetts Avenue. And that's why we've put the streetscape on the north side of the block. The intent is to install the city's streetscape on the south side of the block as well to complete the block. And what we did was we utilized brick textures and colors that are complementary to our streetscape and complementary to the colors that are within the Meriton development. And that's why you see the brick, it looks with those brick colors. So really it's a beautiful screen wall, and I think that if I can say that, but ultimately we landed at about $397,000 on the cost of this. And so I don't know if you all have seen the Palmetto substation screen wall. It fits the context of that area. It is a textured finish on that wall, but at the same time, this fits the context of what we're building out in this portion of downtown.
Any questions on this at all? Yes, Commissioner Mann.
So what is the height? I know the Palmetto is very high.
Sure. So this, because of the grades, this thing, it kind of oscillates, but the maximum height is 10 feet.
Is that similar to Palmetto?
I want to say the Palmetto substation is a little bit taller.
Okay.
I think it may be taller, but I'm not sure. I can follow up and find out the height on the Palmetto
But
substation.
if you feel like when you're walking, you feel like you're not going to be electrocuted.
Well, and
Well, I can't help that feeling. Maybe you will feel that way.
the nice thing is it takes your eyes away from that and puts them
Yes. Okay, you feel like you're on this.
It's really beautifully done.
Okay, the height was the main thing I was worried about too.
The normal height is, it's between 8 to 10, right?
That's correct. It is articulating between 8 and 10 feet.
Yes, Commissioner Music.
Liz, is it a block wall with brick facade? I mean, it's not going to be structural brick.
Correct. It will
Okay.
be a CMU block wall. That's
Yes.
a cost savings, right? And then
Yeah.
we'll surround it with the brick.
Facade with that, okay.
That's right.
And your comment was, and what else are you asking in there? Just wondering.
Well, it's going to be a block wall, and then like they would the traditional, they're going to be brick ties, and then they'll brick it as opposed to actually building a brick 2 or 3 layered. Yeah.
Okay. And they order the patterns that way as well? Is that how they do that?
That is patterned at the entrance with the diamond at the entry so that, it calls at that gate, particularly for the service workers, that they understand that that is the
Where
entrance.
you turn in, so you don't have to replace the brick. Commissioner Reed?
So it's not going to be brick, it's going to be what I call cut brick.
No.
It's stucco, but it's going to be cut.
No, sir, it will be
Just like this?
a brick wall. It'll be
So
a
it's
brick
going to be
finish.
the small, thin ones that are slapped on there.
No, it'll actually be a full brick. So the outer layer, it's 4-inch CMU block that'll be interior to that. You'll have a couple of courses of that block, and then you'll have the brick finish around it. It'll be bonded with the brick. And I don't want to misspeak because I know I have a construction guru in the room, but
There
I wanna make
is
sure I'm using the right
detail
words.
attached to the memo. There's a detail that shows the
That's
construction plan.
I guess I should have touched that before I asked my question.
Thank you. Next.
City Manager.
Yes, sir. It's you.
Yes, sir. I have 2 items and then 1 quick verbal this morning. The first item on the agenda is related to an award or request to award an RFP to Gallagher Benefit Services. This is for employee benefits broker and consultant. Gallagher Benefits is the current employee benefit broker consultant. The employee benefits broker consultant consulting on behalf of the city regards changes to our benefits plan and other associated legal requirements. There was an RFP that was put out. We received 96 responses. There were from the 96, there were 7 firms that responded after the 96 request. On March 31st, the 7-member selection committee that was comprised of a cross-section of city management team and 1 city commissioner ranked and requested an interview with the top 3 firms. The result of that ranking is a request to award to Gallagher. And so it'll be recommended that it's authorized that city officials negotiate a contract that'll be in effect for 2 years with 3 additional 1-year renewals for the annual fee for services of $111,000 with Gallagher Benefits Services.
Any questions on that? Commissioner Mann?
Was this the one that we had, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Was this the one that we had contested last year that had a lot of different verbiage on another local group, or was that something different?
Yes, this was one of them, and there was two local vendors that participated of the 7 respondents, that they got the local vendor preference for the applied points. Of that, only 1 local vendor qualified into the interview round, so 1 local vendor did interview against the other 2 in the final round. And Commissioner McLeod was your commission representative on this.
Yeah, I think it was a Centria, am I correct?
Yes.
That
In the
you're
interview
referring
round.
to. And so in the agenda item, I didn't list the different respondents, but a Centria was one.
And the other one who got local preference points was BKS.
Okay.
But they didn't have enough points to qualify them for the interview round.
And we haven't heard anything contested. They won't come Monday and tell us they didn't feel like it was fair process.
We do have a public records request by one of the
And they have asked, more than just them have asked for scoring, but that's not necessarily out of the norm. But there is a bid protest period that has since passed.
Right.
So,
Commissioner McLeod, any comments?
Sure. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be part of the process. And I said afterwards it was a learning experience. It's not one that I want to do every month. It was, there was a lot of work that went into it. And the team members who spent time reading all of the proposals and then doing the interviews. But I know we wanted to make sure that it was a fair and competitive process and that we weren't just going with a vendor in Gallagher who we've had for many years and relying on that. And from what I saw, this was it was a thorough vetting process from the reading the proposals to the interview stage as well. And so I think it was competitive. It was, all of the firms had to come in, especially the interview phase, and really bring their best proposal forward. And lots of questions were asked, a lot of time spent on the committee of diving into some of the details of the proposals. And so I feel confident about where we landed. I don't think anybody would come and be able to say that it wasn't thorough, competitive from the process standpoint.
and just to point of illustration, Gallagher, the original proposal that Gallagher came in with, through the process, Gallagher has agreed to negotiate their price lower to meet the number 2. So that was one of the questions we did through the interview process to try to get the best price for the city. So this contract with Gallagher is a better contract price-wise than the contract you saw last year even.
Good. Commissioner, did you have something else?
No. That answered.
All right, next, sir.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, just to tag on to Commissioner McLeod's comments and just, for public information, it's not really typical that we have city commissioners be a part of these selection committees. We certainly can, and we are, and that's really because of the conversations that we had last year and the changes that were made to the process, and then just exposing the commission to what that process involves. So, it's not typical, and really it's not planned to continue unless the commission would like to, request to sit in on some selection committees. But it's more just the experiential piece is the reason why.
And there was a sensitivity to this one that we wanted to make sure was bridged a little.
Yes, sir. And that would also apply to the next one. So I'll...
Just one more question. Did we feel that this go-around, it was better after making the tweak with regard to the points versus the percentage? Wasn't that part of the discussion?
It was part of the process, and it certainly shows where all of the submittals ranked clearly. Step by step, we did the submittals and ranked them, gave them points, and then added the points on that. Unfortunately, the locals did not rise to the top, but they were provided that 5% points, and I think it shows that...
We knew because before I know, first of all, the local vendor preference was brand new.
Right.
And we had not advertised that, or, very well. And then also, then afterwards, we were not sure if we had selected the right thing with regard to this because there's multiple layers to it versus just a simple, let's compare the numbers, and within a person. So I was just curious, Chad, when you sat through that, did you feel like that we made the right choice by tweaking that ordinance with regard to how we're giving the local vendor preference when it's a complicated mix like this?
Yeah, I think it would be tough for me to say had we applied the points versus the percentage, what the difference might be. But I do know that we had clear discussions about how we were applying local vendor preference at every stage of the process. And so that is I think from the vendor side would have been clear for both local and non-local how that factors into the equation. And just one other thing I will say is that we, as a committee, we all said that the top 3 and maybe even 4 firms are all very qualified and would be capable of doing the work. And so you get into it's tight and the scoring can be close, but I felt like all of the firms really were eager to be the vendor for the city of Lakeland, even our established vendor in Gallagher, who's been with us for 20 years. I didn't sense at all that they were resting on that they've been our vendor for so long. So that was, for me, it was great to see and just be part of the process. So I thank you for the opportunity. And Joyce, I certainly want to recognize the team members who were part of that because it was a lot of effort that went into that. And I think some of of those team members, it was their first time participating in a selection process like this, and they seemed to really enjoy that experience and being able to be part of it.
Great. Okay.
And there is a piece of this that you don't appreciate, that it reflects that maybe we don't appreciate the people who have provided us with great service over the years as we look at this. And so I don't think that it's good that you make that statement, because we're not just saying that at all. We just want to be making certain that we're keeping those windows open equivalently. Okay.
Okay, the next item is similar. It's also the recommendation regarding an award of an RFP for property and casualty insurance consulting services to Gallagher Risk Management Services. Gallagher is the city's current broker on the consulting services for property and casualty insurance. The consulting service for this provides insurance consulting for services on lines, including things like excess workers' compensation, property and boiler machinery, inland marine, excess liability, public officials and employment practices, aviation, sculptures, and cyber and crime coverage. Notice regarding this was sent to 100 different vendors, and 3 proposals were received. Similarly to the last discussion, there was a 7-member selection committee comprised of a cross-section of city management and city staff, and Commissioner McCarley served on this particular committee. They decided to interview the top 2 responsive firms, and the results of that was now a recommendation to negotiate a contract for 3 years with 2 additional 1-year renewal options for an annual fee for services of $125,000 with Arthur J. Gallagher Risk Management Services, and that would again be for the broker consulting services for property and casualty insurance.
Any questions on that one?
I'll just make a comment and kind of let Chad talk about the other one. I, too, agree with Chad as far as our team goes. I think it was a thoroughly vetted process. I will say that similar to being an elected official, the incumbent tends to have a lot more leeway, not leeway, but just a kind of an advantage because they know the system and they work the system, and I'm a systems person and a process person. So I think that's one area that we could probably look at just a little bit. Like Commissioner McLeod, I think the 2 that we interviewed both could handle the situation. The interesting thing about the one I was involved in, I'm not sure yours, Chad, but it is a breadth of work. So if you go with what Sean just said between employment, Lakeland Electric facilities, our property management, all of the things that our team has to look at, and Joyce is obviously, an expert in the risk area, so she does such a good job. But to have different sectors involved in that vetting process was really, really important. So kudos to you guys for having us all involved, because I think great questions were asked. And it's a Herculean effort. So I understand now the pivot of time frame and why that time frame is so important. We had questioned that, I think, last year during vendor preference, where we were like, why can't we pivot faster? It's so many disciplines of professions and scope of service. And Gallagher is great. I don't know how to do it, but I would like to see the process just maybe as we continue to discuss it over the next 5 years or whatever, really looking at that. I felt like in the presentations that there's just, Gallagher serves so many different entities around the state of Florida and around the country, and they're really just, their skills are just on the mark every single time. And it's sort of like being a new kid in school that you're like, well, I didn't know the president. I mean, the professionals knew how long the presentations were. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's a different entity when you cover that much ground. And I do think our number 2 could probably handle it too. But I think if you brought in somebody new, there would be some tweaking that would have to go on, because it's such a breadth. And the information is hard for new people to come in and dive in. Gallagher has such experience with us. When you look at Lakeland Electric and just all the ins and outs of that, I thought they did a great job covering that. And I think that's the hard part of Joyce's job, is really communicating and educating other vendors the breadth of everything that goes on. And so Gallagher served us well over the years, and I feel confident in this. I just think that it's hard to be the new person. It's hard to be the new team coming in. So it's like hiring and, getting an intern that doesn't have experience.
comments, Commissioner Mann?
Well, and just to, it was Commissioner Franklin, obviously, when he was sitting here, being in the insurance business, who had said from his past experience, oh, this is just, this RFP process, it's really not going to let anyone new in the system. It's just on autopilot because it's such a big system. But he also had said, to the time frame, you can't just give us a small window.
Right.
Like a newbie is going to need a lot more time and a much deeper dive to be able to assess the situation and find out if they can compete and how they would price it. So, it is tricky, and I'm just so thankful, to the city manager and to our team for allowing Commissioner McLeod and Commissioner McCarley to have this open discussion. We're the voice of the people, and so they need to feel like they were heard last year when they came to the meeting, and they need to feel like, Scott Franklin, how many years ago was when he said that, this is complex and it is hard, and you've got to be a professional to be able to work with the city of Lakeland, and we do want the best cost, to Emily's point. But, we are in the business of educating our citizens and giving local vendor preference when we can, because we want the people who live, work, and play here to be able to do business with us. And so I just am really grateful, after last year, having that lengthy discussion and kind of using that vote as leverage to have the conversation and let the community sort of in on the process. I just am thankful for a little more time this morning, and hopefully people who are listening realize that that's the only reason this happened, was because people showed up, they let their voice be heard. Commissioner Franklin was kind of in that business and sort of piqued our interest on, so this is something we shouldn't just rubber stamp. I mean, this is something, potentially there's other people out there who could do this business as well. So a lot of facets with local vendor preference and with insurance in particular, and y'all being a part of that, so thank you.
And the local vendor for this one was the second one. Brown & Brown had the local vendor preference points applied.
And the only other thing I'll add is there is just a lot to it that I feel confident in our staff and our team, but I also feel like this is an ongoing discussion. I don't think that just because we were included this time that other commissioners shouldn't have the opportunity to sit in on it and look at it. And also in the selection process, I know it's a lot of work for Joyce and her team to get us all in the same place to sit and read all of our material, but I think the timeline worked for us as far as the process was concerned, as reading the material and staying up to speed, and they did a great job. And it's just something I think we should continue to look at and review, but I think that about all of our practices across the city, that we should constantly be in review and constantly be saying, how are we doing and what does it look like? And I know that takes time, but I think that's what we're all called to do as commissioners.
It's vigilance, and that's good. And anytime there's a concern on any of those things, I think we let our city manager know. And if we want to participate, you're there. All right, that brings us to our city attorney, A1.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, just can I have one quick verbal?
Yes, you can.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Kevin Cook. I had sent an email out to the commission about the plans moving forward on the South Florida Avenue lane realignment. And so we've got some additional information that Kevin's going to update everyone on.
Thank you, Sean. Good morning, everybody. We'd just like to give you guys an update. Initially, we stated that the public education campaign for the State Road 37, South Florida Avenue lane reduction project, also known as the Dixieland Road Diet, that we'd start the information campaign May 2nd. Initially, we were right on target for that, but we had a meeting yesterday. Chuck Barnby, Brian Ruiz, and members of his team, and of course the communications department. We're also working with our partners at FDOT. We're still awaiting some of that crucial latest traffic data that we want to include in the education campaign. We're going to start this, instead of May 2nd, it's going to start May 9th, but it still works. We're going to let the education campaign work for 4 weeks. Then FDOT will start their survey that's going to run for 2 weeks, and we're going to have a public meeting at the RP Funding Center the last week of June. We initially set a time for June 30th, but we understand some of you aren't going to be here, so we're going to work with Tracy and find out what's available on your calendars in that same week. So we're just working backwards. We still have a 4-week education campaign, a 2-week survey, so the survey can run its course, and then we'll have the public input meeting at the RP Funding Center. So I just want to give you guys an update. Stand for any questions if you may have any.
Thank you, Sean and Kevin. So when I was talking to Chuck the other day, and we were talking about just for us to receive feedback, instead of it just being like pro-con, I hate the road diet or I love the road diet. he had encouraged me to say, when you're talking to someone at Publix or any number of places that they'd love to tell me how much they love the road diet, to get some constructive pinch points, like laser focus in on, it is this road when I'm turning left, it is the signalization at, McDonald turning into Frank Lloyd Wright, I can't get onto South Florida. It's when I enter it and that no one uses the right turn lane when I'm going south before it gets to the Miller Building, there at the corner of Lime. To give the citizens, because they're astounded to think we can't go back. They just think if we hate it enough, we'll just go back to how it was. So I'm sure you're covering all of these things. I'm just, in case you're not, that we're really looking at that this was not a diet to practice if we like it or we're going to go back to what was before. It's really to assess the in context, that street, have all the sensors, and to get citizen feedback on how we could modify, what could be better, instead of I hate it or I love it. So I'm hopeful that in the education campaign that they'll have opportunity for people who like to vocalize how they feel, that they would, if they could, just like when we're doing it, yes, talk about specifics. Like I've said to someone, have you ever got caught behind a bus now on that section? No, like I never even see a bus. Like, oh, did you know that we've been working with the buses and the signalization? So, but it's hard to get them past their frustration to constructive criticism that will help us going forward. So I'm hopeful that you have some kind of way to receive that specific information on signalization, roads that lead to that area, entering it, exiting it, time of day, all of that.
One reason we're postponing the start of the education campaign a week is we're waiting on some of that crucial data, the latest traffic data to come in, because that's part of the information campaign. But we do I shouldn't say pick, but we do have specifics that we're focusing in on, and we also have a who, what, why, when, and where. So the initial first post is going to be a carousel that's, why are we even doing this kind of thing? But it's a month-long campaign, and we definitely have specifics. And our customers and our citizenry, they don't have any issue of letting us know how they feel on social media.
Right. I just want it to be a little more constructive instead of, I just don't like it.
Well, that's part of, I believe, Chuck, and I'll look to you, that's part of the public input meeting that we're going to have the last month of June. That's really what we're looking for there, specifics from the community on what would you like to see different and things of that nature. So I'll pass this over to Chuck.
We can also pass that along to our partners at FDOT who are going to do the survey.
Correct.
And try to get them to do the survey in a way that will provide the detailed specifics versus just the general comments that you're asking for.
And that is exactly part of DOT survey. There is a place where you can have specific points and issues and locations, and so that survey will get to some of that in advance of the public meeting.
But the mention of the bus lines and things of that nature are definitely part of the information campaign.
And the specifics matter, so people need to be specific.
Well, and I think just to that point, that should be all of us as commissioners, that we just keep saying, I had an English teacher in high school that wrote on my paper all the time, be specific, be specific, be specific. And so I think that, I'm glad you brought that up, because I do think we all get kind of hammered that I just hate it. I had a discussion at a meeting on Monday evening with someone who said, well, that's not what was promised, and this was only a test. And I said, it's never going back to the 4 lanes. Like, my understanding from DOT is it's not going back to 4 lanes the way it was, because it was a failing road. 5 lanes, yeah. And I'm like, but that's probably not going to happen. So it might be 3 with a turn lane. It could be, and you have to come and talk to us. And just to be really candid and honest with them too, that expectation is it won't be like it was.
Well, and they're part of this process.
Right.
It isn't a them versus us.
Right.
It is all of us looking at input, and so provide it. Commissioner Reed?
In the survey, is the DOT, are they going to mail out stuff? Because most of the response that I get personally are from the local owners along that and vendors on that street. They're the one that I hear from mostly that complaints.
And that's interesting, because I hear positive things from the
Well,
vendors.
you're talking the wrong ones, I guess. These are my friends.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
But I just didn't wonder, are they going to mail out something, or just, if you hear about it, you get to us respond?
It's web-based, and there will be an outreach to let people know how they can get to that survey. So it'll only be electronic-based. You'll be able to go through different tabs, so you'll be able to enter in your information. Are you a commuter? Are you a business business owner, get that information, and you'll have a map where you can actually zoom in to specific parts of the corridor, because that's part of the challenge too, is that obviously that's a very complicated area, and so, if I say it's the South Side Cleaners and somebody else says the issues at Crescent or Frank Lloyd Wright, we're talking about the same place, but it kind of gets translated differently, and so with having that visual, it's going to be important to be able to zoom in, and you can put your tab in and explain exactly what the issue is.
No, that's great. That's great.
That's awesome.
And to add to that, Commissioner, the call to action and throughout the entire education campaign is going to be that public input meeting. So it's going to be pushed quite heavily.
That's good. So we need all those guys there. Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you, Mary. And I had a similar question as Commissioner Reed. I think that's a good point. I would love to know a little bit more about how they plan to deploy the survey. I know it's web-based, but he raises a good point that there are people along the corridor who have businesses there who may not know that it's out there. There may be people who aren't on social media. So I would love to get some more information on how that will be deployed in the plan to reach as many people as possible and get a good response on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor? Yes, Commissioner Music. Sorry.
So at the strategic planning meeting we talked about a survey that had gone out, and it was a low percentage return. We were kind of frustrated about what was our meeting we were at? Was it not
Value survey?
Yeah,
That's values.
My point is overall surveys, right? I mean, we put a lot of effort, time, energy, resources into that. Weren't really happy with the amount that we get back. And I think that we're going to see a tremendous difference between the people who respond and the people who show up. Right? I mean, only because people either are fatalistic about surveys, they don't matter, or they don't understand it, or I think the whole thing stinks, so I'm just going to hit every spot and not like it. So I'm a little apprehensive. Not apprehensive about it. I think it's great. We need to do it because people are going to respond. It's just that I think the return, and I don't know. I'm just interested in that because I know that there's so much effort, time, and energy, and your team does such a great job. But it flies out the window with these great hopes, and then what happens with it. But when we have that meeting, it'll be completely different. I mean, it's going to be very loud, very vocal, and when people find out. And I think find out is the best way to say it, that it cannot go back if what you're saying is correct. They're gonna be like, why am I even bothering then? That's going to happen.
Well, and it can't go back to 5 lanes.
Right, yeah.
Okay. These are portals of communication for a variety of different ways that people can communicate, and that's what we've got to do. So we're just trying to be as broad as possible.
Yeah, and I think I certainly think that's the way to do it, as long as the individuals who are filling out the application or the survey, but maybe can't show up there, feel that their voice is still as important as the people who are showing up.
That's right.
And that kind of thing. That's all I'm saying.
Well said. Anything else on this? Yes.
Not to prolong it, but I appreciate what you said, Commissioner Madden, in bringing Chuck's advice to us, because I haven't done that. And many times recently, I had somebody at church a couple weeks ago pull me aside and say, can I just tell you, I hate the road diet. But I didn't think to say, well, tell me specifically pain points, what could be improved, and bring that back. So thank you. I think that's on us, as you said, to help carry that message as we're in the feedback gathering process.
Okay. Nice. You have any other?
Let's get that out.
That's all right. That brings it to 6A1.
Is that your last verbal?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Several land use zoning cases this morning. The first is a modification of a conditional use to allow an outdoor covered play pavilion at the Geneva Classical Academy facility on New Jersey. Chuck, you can pull up the aerial.
So this is the general site of Grace City Church and Geneva Academy on the east side of New Jersey Road, north of Sylvester. So the request right now is to amend the conditional use to add a covered pavilion to allow the kids to be able to play and kind of somewhat get out of the elements. The structure itself is just under 10,000 square feet, 9,646 square feet. It'll have a maximum roof height, kind of as measured on the mean between the eaves and the ridge of the roof, of about 32 and a half feet. It'll be set back from New Jersey Road by about 200 feet, It's about as far east as you can get on the site without getting into the floodplain area that goes back towards the kind of the northeast corner of the portion of the property. But essentially, the school has been great to work with in terms of coming up with something that had a lower structure height, that was architecturally enhanced and somewhat blends in with the school campus itself. We had contacted Lakeland Police to get their feedback in terms of making sure that the inside of the structure was visible, so that it provided more eyes on the street, or eyes in the facility, if you will. And so it's reflected in the conditions. We're requiring the planting of crepe myrtles on the corners. So on the pillars here on each of the four corners of the structure, based on input received at the Planning and Zoning Board meeting last month. There will be some additional trees that are planted on the east side of the site to, again, help further buffer the structure from the neighborhood to the east. These lights will not be in the structure. In fact, the conditions specifically prohibit lighting inside, just to address concerns that this is going to encourage recreational uses late into the evening hours. And so the school is completely fine with that. We really only had one negative comment at the last Planning and Zoning Board meeting, and it was because of the proximity of the structure to New Jersey Road. It was a resident off of Jay Place. But we did explain that this is literally as far east as you can push the structure. You really can't go behind the sanctuary or the main building on campus, because then you would impact the traffic circulation for the school, and you would also lose that visibility from the street that is important for security purposes. So this is what we'll be reviewing, and the site plan has already been submitted, pending approval by the commission. And so this is a very limited scope of this conditional use change.
As a comment on the approval of that and the construction of any kinds of these kinds of pavilions, making certain we have an adequate insulation layer between that roofing makes a huge radiant difference down below in the areas. And it's not part of what we have in this information, but I think it would be prudent for us to always work to encourage that, because in the heat of the summer, it makes it just much more palatable. That's a that's not our role. It's just an encouragement. Any questions on that one at all? Okay.
All right, the next two items are related. Number 2 is the change to the comp plan future land use map for this property, and number 3 is the change in zoning for the property. This is to allow 120 additional multifamily units in some property that's just west of Hardin and south of the Parkway.
Exactly. This is what you're seeing here is the site is at the southeast corner of Pipkin Creek Road, and the point where Drainfield transitions into South Parkway Frontage Road. It's within the Lakeside Preserve PUD, which is formerly Hunterfield, which was formerly Palm Springs, and so it's been a PUD that's been around for a while. And so this is a three-layered revision to the development. The first is a land use change on about 8.5 acres to go from neighborhood activity center to residential medium. That would also lead to a PUD modification to replace entitlements for 20,000 square feet of retail and 45,000 square feet of office with the ability to have 120 multifamily units. So the property to the east over here is currently owned by the Lakeland Housing Authority. The same developer, Alliance, out of the Orlando area, is also looking to purchase the corner piece, which is the subject of the land use zoning and the context district change. They want to add the 120 units to that plan, and I'm going to just skip up here to the layout. The end result will be 391 multifamily units. There will likely be changes to the conditions that were approved by the Planning and Zoning Board to address really 2 key issues: access internal between the multifamily and the single-family components, and establishing clearer roles and responsibilities for each developer. And then also, we're requiring that both developers work together amongst themselves to develop a fair share plan to mitigate the overall cumulative traffic impacts at Pipkin Creek Road and Drainfield. because most of the traffic is heading north. In the morning, they're heading right to come into town, and in the evening, they're coming down Drainfield Road. And so we've been in constant contact with both sets of developers. They've got, thankfully, the same transportation consultant, so the analyses are being coordinated with each other. There's actually a meeting going on as we speak now with Polk County to look at the permitting requirements for Pipkin Creek Road, because that is a Polk County facility. We'll be setting up a meeting with DOT to talk about Drainfield Road. But the intent is for us not to be in the middle of negotiating who's going to do what and at what point in time. We want them to work together to come up with an agreement amongst themselves that lays that out with certain thresholds. Because ultimately, the single-family component, which is under development now, is going to build out at 426 single-family units, and then, of course, the 391 multifamily. So it's going to be a sizable development, but it will work if everybody pitches in and funds their part of the mitigation.
Okay, questions, Commissioner Reed?
Thanks. Sarah had her hand up first. I'll proceed to her first.
It's okay.
Why didn't the Lakeland Housing Authority, and other groups have tried to buy this from them in the past and they never wanted to sell it. What prompted them to sell it now versus we're not building it because they've had this for a long, long, long time?
The only thing I can think of is market conditions. We've seen a lot of requests for multifamily product, and of course the housing authority's portion already allowed it, so it wasn't. I think it was probably market and
so they're not. They don't think that we need more. Multifamily units here. Why aren't we building it? Why aren't they building it per se versus selling it to someone else?
I'm not sure exactly what their thoughts are internally. I mean, for us, it's a strategic intersection near the Polk Parkway where it does make sense to have multifamily development, and this is really just an incremental expansion of what's already allowed on the housing authority side. So this will be market, completely market rate multifamily.
Comments or thoughts on that?
He didn't have to give the answer. He didn't have the answer I wanted. He didn't know. I don't know either, but
Commissioner McCarthy.
I would just ask that as we look at these going forward on Monday, can you do as up-to-date as we can find a Google Earth of this whole, not just this development, but what's going out? Because I think you're right that multifamily here, this is a prime space, but you're talking about only an east exit. You can only get on that road and go east. I don't think you can come back left coming out of it, right?
You have to go to Pipkin.
You have to go to Pipkin. You can go left there?
Yeah,
okay.
you can come out, and in fact, at this location, you can come down actually to Pipkin Road.
Okay.
The traffic study looked at South Pipkin and Pipkin Creek as well as South Pipkin.
Okay.
So
I would just like to see Google Earth because I think it's going to be looking at how many rooftops we have in that area, and you're further west is to the airport, but all that. I just want to see all that growth in that area as real of time as we possibly can.
You want to see that Monday at first reading, or when you have the public hearing 2 weeks from Monday?
I'd kind of like to see it Monday. I don't need to probably see it again. If you can. It's I can Google it right now, but I thought it would be good on the screens for everybody to see.
Yeah, I can grab a Google aerial shot because they're pretty up to date in terms of being able to see what's going on with Riverstone and Morgan Creek and everything down there. And actually, all of those trips were also factored into the traffic study. So they built upon what's already approved out there, like on Central Park, and so there's a lot going on, and we can lay that out.
Thank you, Chuck.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner.
Chuck, and I tried to look at those quickly, but so my church is on Pipkin Creek. So as you go down, and it's just yeah. So as you're heading down Pipkin Creek to Drainfield, right? And you can take the left, and you can get off. That is that ultimately when they're doing that development, are they going to do their own additional to that? Because that's a tight
turn.
And that's part of the county's conversation actually going on right now.
Okay.
We had an initial conversation, I think it was Wednesday, and what they're looking at is actually almost like a 4-lane section on Pipkin Creek.
Okay.
In this 500-foot area here, where at Pipkin Creek and Drainfield, the question has always been, do you signalize that intersection, or does it work if you put a right turn lane in? And so they're showing a right turn lane. You take that right turn out of the mix, and you likely would need a traffic signal. In the opposite direction, it could be a question of, and this gets back to the access issue, of what kind of cross-access is ultimately going to be able to be formalized between the multifamily here and the single-family to the south.
Yeah.
That gets into a direct issue, and why there probably will be some modified conditions coming back for consideration of how do we address Pipkin Creek Road. And as long as we can get a long enough southbound left turn lane that serves the apartment community, then really that solves everybody's issues in terms of access. And so, that's part of, we've got about 500 feet to work with, and it looks like that we can have almost opposing turn lanes that would be able to serve project traffic and make it manageable at entering.
So one of the interesting things that you said, obviously based on your position and the auspices that we have, you said, if we can get everybody to play together, right, on this, which is interesting because we're approving certain things that really, a lot of it isn't in our preview, right, to be able to go, and we'll say, yeah, we approve that, that's great, but then if the other players don't do what we're looking to do, how do we balance that a little bit?
It's really the conditions that we have in the PUD. I think as it stands right now, that we are clarifying, like the cross-access, that there has to be cross-access, and it's a question on who's going to be responsible for what on the other person's or the other developer's property. And so those are the conversations we've been continuing to have up until this week. Ultimately, we're reviewing right now subdivision plans for Lakeside Preserve on the single-family side that would build out the balance of that 426 unit, and then we will be reviewing site plans for the multifamily as well. So our message to the developers is that you're in a planned unit development, so there is a level of coordination that has to occur within those PUD boundaries. And we are reviewing development plans and will be going forward, and our expectation is we don't as the city want to step in and get in the middle of two developers and working out what ultimately is a business arrangement, but it involves infrastructure. So for us is we just want to make sure that infrastructure deal is worked out and the money is committed to prior to approving the next phase. And so that's where we do have some leverage on that front.
Well, and when you pull back, like Commissioner McCarley was saying, and start looking back, right up the road, because that's where my office is on Drainfield, is you've got the Waring Road intersection that we know is coming, but is miserable right now. So trying to balance and juggle all of those pieces. But yeah, this is a great use of that. We're all just thinking of transportation, obviously. So thank you.
Good question. Thank you. All right, next.
All right, so that covered 2 and 3, same project. Number 4 is a somewhat routine ratification of Lakeland Mass Transit District's annexation of 2 properties within their boundaries. Chuck, you want to point out where these are?
Sure. The first one on the screen here is in the northwest corner of I-4 and Kathleen Road. That's where Lakeland Regional Health is developing their medical office complex and their urgent care. This probably because Lakeland Regional is a nonprofit. We're not going to see any immediate tax revenue off of that annexation, but if they do parcel off portions in the future, it's already in the district, and it would be able to, we would be able to levy that $500,000 ad valorem tax. There is transit service on Kathleen Road now, and in fact, the developer of the 7-Eleven that's in existence today at Mall Hill, they built a transit shelter, and so we do have connectivity that's already built in. And the site plan also builds on that connectivity. So this is all being worked together, and so that's that one. The second one is Gibson Oaks. It's immediately to the east of Wedgwood Golf Course and west of Soaker Loop Road. This is a development where they're building 72 multifamily units today. So that's under construction. This is just part of the city that was never annexed into the Limetown District, and so this is another incremental step of adding the residential into that district. Route 3, or the pink line, operated by the Citrus Connection, operates on Soaker Loop Road, so you're within easy walking distance of 30-minute transit service. The developer was happy to submit the annexation petition and bring the project into the district.
Question on this. Broader question.
is there a time we ought to do an annexation review overall? And has that been about 10 years, 15 years since we've done that?
It's been longer than that. It's been about 99 to 2000.
Okay.
And I think the last massive annexation referendum was when the power plants in Southwest Polk came into the district, and that was back when Steve Giddens was the director. I think there are some opportunities to bring in larger areas, larger neighborhoods. I mean, you look up Circle Loop Road, a lot of that is out of the transit district. We do have some areas in Southeast that need to be brought in as well. We have been actually talking this week with the county, too, as part of its development review process. They actually have policies that require developers to submit annexation petitions as well to the transit district, and I don't believe that has happened as of late. So we're trying to work on data sharing and other things, show them our process to maybe get some larger development sites in. But yeah, I think it is definitely a good opportunity to take a look at larger annexations, especially in North Lakeland, where there are routes that are running, but they're outside of the district.
And I really direct this question to you because from the standpoint of the rapid growth that we're having, should we be taking a look?
And so, as you've seen, we do kind of one by one as we're working on development that's has adjacency, to the incorporated city limits. We do look at those individually. Now, in terms of mass annexation and just extending, there's always a difficult balance between the revenue that's produced by that versus the cost. And as we extend services out, just like the discussion we're having now about the need for a fire station and the extreme cost of that, north, it's always a difficult situation because if the revenue generated, of course, won't cover costs, then, of course, tax increases most of the time is how to accomplish that. So that balance, if we're going to do large-scale annexation, is one we would need to study pretty thoroughly. But certainly could. We would likely use even some consultants, I would think, to do that.
I guess the reason I asked the question is not prompted just from this, it's something I've been mulling over, is should we have an area do we have areas that are vulnerable that we really would be ahead of if we did the annexation in advance that would help us, that we think are targeted?
And is that and for my clarification, is it just the transit district annexation? That's where my brain was.
No.
Was transit district annexation.
Of course it was. And that's wonderful, and that was the context of this, so that was, my question's broader.
But also keep in mind, as we experience now, even though we may annex some areas, it doesn't mean that the transportation network within those areas would become the city's jurisdiction.
Correct. My questions are totally mutually exclusive.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and that's interesting because so many of us on the campaign trail, you're going out and you're realizing like I'm not in the city. Like, what do you mean they're in the city and you're not? And it's interesting in that whole Pipkin area for sure. Where I was going around, I've got friends that right across the street is county and their city and whatnot. So I think it's a great idea for us to at least review it because those questions have come up to me. So to be able to have that answer from an educational standpoint, but also from a review, the fact that it's been that long.
If I could add a little perspective, I was asked to be on a review committee a couple of times over the years. The biggest one was what Chuck was alluding to in the late 90s, early 2000s. There were some enclaves that we were going to bring into the city in and around Hallam that were between Hallam and Lake Miriam. And so what we found was two challenges. One was that you don't generate enough revenues on the gas tax side, and this was even back then when many more people were driving than they are now. And so from a transportation standpoint, when you expand the number of miles that we're maintaining, you run into a little bit of a deficit. And so I don't know that that's probably changed. It's probably, well, I know it is worse now than it was then. But the second piece was, think about it this way. Think about the services that we provide for the millage we ask. How much extra do we bring into the general fund from dividends, and then the $4.5 million we send over from the public fund to the general fund to subsidize the millage that we have. So annexing does not and I'm convinced of this again today, it's from a math standpoint only. It doesn't cover the costs associated with bringing those people in and providing just fire services and police services, right? It's usually 1-to-1 on solid waste, but even there, you can't bring on those folks for solid waste until their contracts are up with the county or wherever they were doing, but that's an easy one. But for that, just from a math standpoint only, that probably hasn't changed. But again, we'll look at it, just like Sean said, we'll look at it anytime you want us to. But just think of it that way, for the subsidy of the ad valorem, we don't cover the costs just for fire and police from our ad valorem, right? We don't collect enough to cover that costs already.
So,
just if that helps.
Yeah, that's very helpful, and would explain lots of our lines that look like this around the edges of the city, as we go along. I'm really asking the question broadly from quality of life, from septic systems versus sewage. I don't know what our hookups are like in those areas, and how much we can pick up, just those kinds of things, and if it would make sense for us, and probably would have to have a commercial area in it that helps a little bit as well. So I was just asking. Sure. Really. Yes.
From a math point, is there a tipping point to where over time it reaches that tipping point, or if it doesn't make mathematical sense at the beginning for this particular area, it will never make sense?
Well, if we look at the transportation side, what we've seen over time is we can do fewer projects. The cost of just repaving a road, let alone building a road, because most of the built roads we build are done with impact fees, right? The ones we maintain to the transportation fund, we are able to do fewer now than we used to. Okay, so the costs have grown faster than what we're seeing as revenue growth. So that's likely not to change unless, for example, the formula used by the state of Florida, where we're getting our transportation, the gas tax revenues, if that changes in the future with the advent of electric vehicles or something like that, and they provide communities with a use tax rather than something else, that may help in the future.
But as it stands, there's no projection for it to hit a point where it's like, okay, we finally have reached that.
And it's same with the costs, because for fire and police, personnel costs in any organization are going to grow faster than the typical Save Our Homes is allowed to grow on tax values that we're going to get for new, right? And we're somewhat boxed in that over time, development is only going to be able to grow so much to where Marsh's numbers are going to eventually not see as much growth as far as new construction as it will. So logically, no. Okay. That doesn't tip and go the other way for those reasons.
Which is kind of back to my discussion about, we do look at when we have opportunities for certain properties that are already adjacent. If we already have services in the area, the utility line comment, if we're already nearby, then it might make sense on those individuals. But when you're talking about kind of a large mass annexation, we won't have utility lines and we'll have to extend them. We won't have enough capacity in fire and police, and we'll have to add additional stations and police officers and the like, substations. And so, mathematically, economically, just for decades now in Florida, it doesn't make a lot of sense to do the mass annexation. But the one at a time, again, depending on what services we're already providing to that particular area or nearby, there's one-offs that make sense.
Well, thank you very much for the broad education in this regard. All right. Any other comments or questions on that? Next.
All right. One resolution, which is our routine loss clearing resolution. Then the next item is the quarterly legal fee report, which is for your information only. The fees paid out to outside counsel for the last quarter were almost identical to the fees we paid for the same quarter in the previous year. The makeup of those fees is a little bit different. A year ago, we were spending a lot of money on water issues. This year, we're spending more on just traditional litigation issues, and I think there are a couple of things going on there. One, we've had what should have been just a routine code enforcement case that the property owners decided to very aggressively litigate in federal court. And so we've had to spend a lot of money on that. Fortunately, we just received a very favorable summary judgment on that. So we have won that case. They are trying to appeal that now to the 11th Circuit up in Atlanta. So we may not be done with that yet, but that's part of the fees. Another thing is just we're seeing that the courts are trying to get their dockets moving again now that we're coming out of emergency orders and whatnot. So a lot of cases are being set for trial. So that's resulting in a lot more activity going on. So I'll stand for any other questions you might have.
Any questions on that at all? On the overview? All right. And is that one not on consent?
It's just for information only, no action.
In case you didn't do anything.
Right.
Okay, great.
All right, the next item is a proposed agreement with Crom LLC for recoding of the two 5 million gallon ground storage tanks out of the TB Williams water plant. These are the tanks that we store our finished water in, and we are required to do this every 5 years to comply with drinking water regulations. We've also noticed some things that need to be repaired in the process. The total cost of the proposal is $507,371. The project will take approximately 25 weeks, and that is included in Water Utilities FY22 budget. I see Robbie Kness over here. He can answer any technical questions you might have about this.
Any at all?
Just, I guess, kind of two things to add. Really, this is just generic O&M. We're going in there fixing some things that are broken. The cost is high just because you can see from the pictures, those are really massive tanks. That's 37 feet tall. That's equipment that they got to get up to the top and, be able to reach that far. The other piece of that, or I guess the other interesting piece, is it's sole source, and we're doing that because this is specialty construction. These are specialty tanks. Generally speaking, the Mississippi River, everyone on the west side of it uses a company called Precon, and Crom is mostly the company that covers the east side. And it'd be hard to find a company that's willing to come in here and work on someone else's design. We're going to do some destructive testing, if you will, kind of chip away some areas and make sure the wires in there are okay. And if they're not okay, they'll run some new wires around it, grout that to prevent future corrosion of those wires and any impact damage to them. So there's some specialty pieces of it, which is why it's the sole source.
How long will this last? Like when will it need to be looked at to be done again?
We do it every 5 years.
Every 5 years, okay.
Yep. And so there have been some inspections. There are some other companies that'll do inspections. They don't do this level of inspection because of the detailed piece of it. They kind of look generically and say, yeah, there's some cracks here. Here's some problems you need to fix. And that's a DEP requirement. We go out and we fix those items. But this time we're digging deeper and we're going to have to actually make some repairs. So we're wrapping it into Crom to do that higher level inspection plus the necessary repairs. Yep.
Yeah. What overall causes the corrosion to take place? Is it
moisture? I mean, concrete always cracks. If you ever look at any concrete anywhere, cracks are natural. The water's going to migrate in there and get to the rebar and cause that. And so you try and put the rebar deep enough to prevent that spalling from happening, but it just eventually gets there, and you try and make those repairs. So
and that's the 5-year interval to seal.
Yep.
Anything else? Okay, next, sir.
Right, the next is a significant item. It's the proposed acquisition and redevelopment agreement with Onyx Investments 2 LLC for the development of the Oak Street parking lot. I think you're all probably familiar with that parking lot. It's a 150-space surface parking lot just to the east of McKill Academy there. I think most of you are around when we originally were in negotiations with a company by the name of Catalyst to develop something there, and that kind of fell apart once COVID hit. But there has continued to be interest in that site, so the CRA staff issued another RFP for this back in July of 2021 and received 2 proposals. One was from True Investors Development, the other was from Onyx. And we had a selection committee that evaluated the proposals, and on September 30th of 2021, unanimously agreed that Onyx was the first-ranked firm and authorized, or that they recommended that we negotiate an agreement with them. That came to the City Commission, when the City Commission also ratified that selection back in October of 2021. So that we've been in the process of working with Onyx on this. And so I'll just go through the different terms of this agreement. There's a lot of different aspects to it, so bear with me here. First, what they're proposing to build there, which would be no less than 200 multifamily residential units, approximately 2,000 square feet of retail or office space, and approximately 424 structured parking spaces, and in addition, 16 on-street parking spaces. The purchase price for the property, once again, CRA-owned property, would be $1,836,000. With respect to the parking garage, the CRA under this agreement would contribute $1.1 million towards those construction costs. We would not pay that amount until the parking garage was completed and the CO is issued, so that reduces our risk somewhat on that. We would get, the city and the CRA would get the exclusive use of 134 of the parking spaces in the parking garage, and would have the right to sublease that to private individuals or make them available for the general public. The CRA would have to pay, is going to pay $70 per space per month for those spaces as well over the 25-year term of the agreement, and that would be subject to a 5% escalation every 5 years. There is, as this gets designed, there's a possibility that there will be fewer parking spaces available in the garage than currently planned. So in the event that Onyx is unable to provide the city and CRA with 134 spaces, the amount that we contribute towards construction would be reduced on a pro rata basis at $8,208 per space. But we nonetheless must receive at least 129 spaces in the garage. And they have to provide at least 150 spaces total between the ones in the garage and on-street parking spaces. So it could be that a few more on-street parking spaces are added, and there are a few fewer parking garage spaces that the CRA receives, but we'd pay less if that's the case. Part of the incentive package is that the city and the CRA would pay, waive, or otherwise satisfy various different development review fees, impact fees, offsite utility improvements, costs and expenses like that, in an amount not to exceed $736,000. There's, as I mentioned, I mean, this project will be designed, and we don't know the full cost at this point. So what the agreement provides is if those fees are going to exceed $736,000, we would have to, the city would have to agree to assume those additional costs. If we decide that, no, we're not going to do that, we would provide notice to Onyx. Then Onyx would have to decide whether they wanted to assume those costs. If they decide they don't want to do that, then they would have the option under this agreement to terminate the agreement and not move forward. So we're not, the city and the CRA would not be on the hook for those unless we voluntarily choose to assume additional costs if the costs go up, and that's a possibility in the environment we're in right now. There is a Tiff incentive associated with this. If Onyx completes their project within 36 months of the closing date, then the CRA would provide Tiff to Onyx in the amount of 80% of the tax increment generated by the property in years 1 through 5 and 60% in years 6 through 10. I believe in their original submittal it was 90% and 70%. That's reduced now to 80% and 60%. The total incentives cap is $1,836,000, which, as you'll notice, matches the purchase price that they're going to pay for the property, so that washes out. However, the TIP payments are not included in that incentives cap. But TIP is not an out-of-pocket expense on the part of the city or the CRA. You know, hopefully the property value increases and they get a percentage of that back, but it's not out-of-pocket on our part. That incentives cap also does not include the underground relocation of any electric utility poles that would need to be relocated. And talking to Elise yesterday, we don't think there are any electric utility poles that would be implicated by that, so hopefully we will not have that cost. As far as affordable housing goes, Onyx has agreed in this contract to lease at least 15 units to tenants whose income would not exceed 80% of Polk County's area median income. And the rents for those would not exceed, for those affordable housing units, would not exceed 30% of AMI. And that affordable housing obligation would be in effect for 15 years after CEO for the project. Timeline for moving forward with this, Onyx has a 90-day inspection period in this agreement to just do all the typical due diligence that developers do to determine whether they want to move forward or not. If they find something that concerns them, they don't have to explain themselves to us. They can terminate the agreement for any reason, as long as they do it prior to the expiration of the 90-day inspection period, and they would get a refund of the deposit that we're requiring that they put down of $25,000. The agreement does give them 2 30-day extensions of the inspection period that they are entitled to at no additional cost. The closing of this transaction would occur no later than 12 months following the execution of this agreement. And that is also subject to 2 30-day extension periods that Onyx can exercise at no cost. And the agreement also gives Onyx the right to pay for additional 30-day extensions if they're not ready to close yet, but they would have to pay $10,000 for each 30-day extension beyond the first 2 30-day extensions of the closing date. This is similar to some of our other projects that we've done in that the agreement requires that Onyx submit their building elevations, exterior materials, and color schemes to the City Commission for y'all's review and approval prior to them moving forward with that. And then also similar to other projects that we've done, we want to make sure that everything's in order before we sell the property. We don't want to relinquish title to the property and then the developer sits on it. So like the Meriton agreement, like the Summit agreement, we require that they have, or actually I think it's not Summit, but Meriton and some others, we require that they have all their building permits in place, they have a contract in place with their contractor, they have a construction loan of sufficient amounts in place, and that will close contemporaneously with our closing of our selling of the property to them. And then they have to agree to commence construction of the project within 30 days of the closing date. So we make sure that they're ready to go before we actually close and give them title to the property. So those are the essential terms of the deal. Elise, I don't know if I missed anything or anything you want to add.
Any questions?
Well, you've done a good job of negotiating through this. That $736,000 is really my question, my biggest question. How do we determine adequately enough, early enough that we've exceeded that cap where they could walk? I mean, we haven't broken ground or anything. All this is work, correct?
It is pre-work, and we are trying to determine quickly, Commissioner, or Mayor, excuse me, their team, their engineering team, they're working through the nuances of it, and they're trying to break down the financials to figure out what the additional cost will be. I know that we ran a preliminary number on potential impact fees and some of the costs, and we roughly came in at a $670,000 range, and so we think we'll be right in the mix, but ultimately it'll just come down to the numbers.
Right. Thank you. The bulk of that 736, as Elise mentioned, is wastewater impact fees. The property's location in the core improvement area exempts it from other non-utility impact fees. This has gone through concept plan review with the development review team, but it is yet to go through full engineered site plan review. And I think what we have heard from the Onyx team, and we're sympathetic to, is the uncertainty, A, of any offsite utility improvements that might be needed to see this project move forward, and B, transportation improvements that might be necessitated potentially at Bay in Massachusetts. And so we'll work through those issues. This gives us the opportunity through a 12-month period to work all of that out, and gives us and Onyx the ability before any more is spent to say, okay, we've discovered something that we did not anticipate. How are we going to resolve it, share in that cost, et cetera?
And just adding to that, I think if we look at the potential for offsite improvements, it could be an indictment on our current infrastructure that, we have development that we would like to see happen, and we want to make sure that we just figure out the most cost-effective way to get around it and negotiate it to go forward with a project of this magnitude.
Commissioner Music.
Yeah, and I think it's awesome, and I think this is the perfect spot for this type of development. But I do have a couple of questions. So, is it 7 stories? Was it 7 when we last talked about it? It has always been 7. Okay. For some reason, I had 5 in my head, but that's okay. Right now, we have how many parking spots?
150 surface parking spots.
So help me understand the reasoning behind this. So we have X number of spots.
Sure.
Excuse me, currently. we're going to sell the property, which by the time it's all done, really, it's just a wash, right, to get the development in. We currently own these spots, but we're gonna now get spots back that we've got to pay rent for.
Correct.
I mean, just help me understand that, because like I have an asset, I'm gonna get rid of it.
I have some questions too, by the way.
What's that?
I'm with you. I've got a bunch, I've got a
Yeah,
list.
but I want to start this by saying I love the development. I think it's great. I'm just trying to wrap my head around, I'm going to give you something, but then you're going to charge me back for less than I currently have.
It's like your children.
So just from a financial perspective, we do lease these parking spaces currently at $35 a month. This parking lot is about 60% empty at the current.
Which is why it's a great development site.
But ultimately, the cost of a covered parking space goes for a greater value than a surface parking lot. And then, in addition to that, the intent here is for us to take those parking spaces and monetize them, so we can actually control those parking spaces and be able to lease them back to other development.
Okay, so we're thinking what we're going to spend. I apologize for interrupting you, but as I'm thinking here, so what we're paying for them, we're going to be able to monetize and charge more for, or at least get covered for?
At least cover.
Okay.
But we work with our parking services team to understand what those values of those covered parking spaces will be long-term. And
sure.
As areas become more urbanized, parking spaces become more of a commodity.
Absolutely.
And then you can charge more for them. So ideally, over time, as the cost of these spaces, for us, they will increase over time over the 25-year period of the lease, but we'll also be able to monetize that, charge more, which is why we're trying to get as many parking spaces under cover as possible.
So, okay, thank you for that. So two other questions in. On the 15 years on the affordable housing, is that pretty standard time frame? And then as the downtown develops and we have more restaurants and we have, people that would be maybe a middle or lower wage that now they're going to not be able to live where they work, is 15 years okay? That's one thing. And then, I graduated from high school over 30 years ago now, so that time flies really quickly. What do we do in 25 years when now we don't have access to these parking spaces anymore? Why not extend that? It doesn't work for them if it's forever?
Well, so I don't know that on the lease side, on the parking spaces, that I've seen a deal go in perpetuity on parking leases. And I want to say that in the Summit deal, we have 30 years of non-exclusive control of those parking spaces as well. So, I think that we worked out the numbers relative to what the developer needed to lock in to make the project go. I don't know that it precludes us from entering into an agreement in the future to further extend that.
Yeah.
And then on the affordability side, I do think 15 years is a standard for a lot of projects. But on the other side of that, unless it's like a tax credit deal where they specifically sought some tax credits and have an extended period of time. Again, I think that if the commission desires, you can certainly ask for an extended period of time or be willing to contribute some additional dollars to extend that time period potentially.
No, and like I said, I love the deal. I'm just, some of these nuances I just am not familiar with. I just wanted to understand that. So.
I think as you look at this, they are not getting any subsidies for that.
Right.
And so in this regard, what we really have done is they've allowed 15 of their units to be available for affordable housing. And just affects their pro forma, and they adjust it accordingly. It's not that it doesn't work, but it's because we don't have a lot of affordable housing nearby, and that is an accommodation that really, I think, was a request of our commission. So that's nice. And in the meantime, we have to work on other locations and units.
Well, that gives us, we look at, we got to start a stopwatch then, because, we've got, if we're going to lose Summit parking or not potentially lose it, we could renegotiate for sure, but let's assume we can. We've got a watch that we've got to watch and have that housing, or not housing, but the parking.
I was focused on housing in my comments.
Certainly, yeah.
But on parking, yes, you're right. And we're going to have to do more parking.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Reed.
Thank you. I have a lot of questions, but...
You got to sit closer to it,
Stand up.
I've got his left ear. First of all, why'd you pick Onyx over True? Have they been building units?
The selection committee selected Onyx over True, and I think it's had a lot to do with capacity, experience, and project pipeline.
And True was laid in.
They were laid in, and they admitted as much too during the selection committee process that, and they were ranked second. So the committee did reserve the opportunity for us to go back to True should things not work out here with Onyx.
Commissioner Madden was the commission representative on that selection committee.
That's right.
Okay, why did the last group withdraw? I knew it was, I heard you say COVID, but there had to be a better reason than that.
Well, I think it was COVID, but also the investor sentiment at a time when it was a little bit rocky to figure out whether or not they'd be able to capitalize on the rents. Not sure if people would be looking to move and ultimately I think that the real estate values and the rentals held true. And I think if you ask, I talked to Joe Benora, who's the principal of that firm. He wants to come to Lakeland. He's interested, and he's continued to do several projects in Fort Myers, and he'd tell you that he probably wished that he would have gone through with
And I guess during their due diligence period, we've found that the property has we've had a phase 1, phase 2 already done.
I'm sorry, one more time.
We've had this property, during the due diligence, we've had people do stuff on the property already? Has there been a phase 1, phase 2 done?
So, not to my knowledge, Commissioner, we have not requested any, we didn't get to the point, I don't think, that they did any of the environmentals on this.
We never did any when we made the acquisition ourselves.
I have no files on that, Commissioner, that show.
How much did we pay for that property? Do you have any idea on that?
I can go back through the files. I want to say this property was under control of the DDA before the CRA took it over, because the CRA and the LDDA were one before they split, and so I have to go back through the files and find out.
Okay, do we know the mix of the units yet?
Working through the unit mix based on the square footages. I think the project size is a little bit in flux right now, which is why we landed on no less than 200 units. And so that's a base number. There could be a few more than 200. When the developer came in, they did give us a unit count mix, but the commission asked for some additional density, so we went up from 153 to 200 as a minimum.
And so we don't know the total leasable space yet either, then, do we?
We do not.
And we don't know the mix of the 15 units that we would actually get for the affordable housing component, which is only 7.5%, which seems low compared to what we've ever done before. We've got more than that on 88 units.
Sure.
And of course, I have a problem with TIF also, but I'll address that in a little bit. And of course, I know we can't waive the impact fees for water and sewer and stuff like that. Some we can because of the area itself. And then the parking ratio is about 1.5. Of course, I understand that their employees the tenants will come home at night and take up the public spaces that hopefully we would use in the evenings, which we probably won't get to use because I think there's not enough parking there to facilitate all the units that are there that area is going to grow to the north, we hope. And I would hope that with our parking spaces that we would own, the public citizens would get to use them versus the tenants that are there, which will probably be the case because there's not enough parking to facilitate the number of units that's going to be built there. But that's just a comment. And then I can't figure out why we're putting in $1.1 million. Why don't we just buy these? Why don't we just own these units as opposed to giving them $1.1 million or $8,200 per unit and still pay them $70 a month? And of course, I want to make sure that if we have tenants there that are subsidized, they don't get stuck out in the not under covered parking as well. And hopefully we would have a ground floor parking. I don't know if we can work that out or not too. Sure. Then do you know who wrote the contract? Did you write the contract?
I did work on it.
Apprehensively answering that question.
I didn't know if it was Abel or Scott or yourself, but I will tell you, it's a very well-written contract.
Well,
compared to what...
You worked on it a lot.
He's the lead of that next time, right?
Compared to what Chris Fear would write is simple. And so I like that component. There again, it is somewhat one-sided in the developer's favor. The point of, and of course, I don't think they have any skin in the game, per se. Everything's going to apply towards the purchase price down the road. If they got 100 and they got 18 months before they ever have to break ground the way it's listed, and they don't have to have one penny that's hard. And on paragraph 11 in contract, they can sell this thing to whoever they want to, and we don't make any money. I would like to do some upside. If we go all through the process and they've got zero money in it, somebody coming offers them $1 million for their contract, we don't get one penny extra, and they get $1 million. I'd like to see something about on paragraph 11. And that's in the TIF. I don't have it, if they're subsidizing their rents for their tenants through TIF, basically, in my opinion. We normally don't do 4 or 5 years TIF, do we?
We do a 5-year TIF. We have done some extended TIF agreements in the past on some deals. I think that in this case, where we're trying to incentivize the developer to get this thing done that has, it's sat vacant, and then thinking about the revenues that it will generate. And so you did lay out a lot there, Commissioner, so I want to just try to touch on a couple of items and perhaps offer some additional context. So when you talk about the transferability of the property and we don't receive any monies for that transfer, it has been the case where an entity may have a separate development corporation, and so there's an ability to transfer that to themselves, and so the affiliation or the affiliate would be able to come in and execute that development without penalty. And so I think that you make a good point there, but we try to leave a little bit of flexibility there. But on the money side for the parking, the parking spaces themselves, they do cost about $20,000 to build them. Okay, and so when you think about how much the investment is up front, the developer will not be able to generate any revenues from those spaces that will ultimately come to us. And so we are paying on the lease on that. So over the life of the lease, we're paying up front the $1.1 million, and then over the life of the 25-year lease, it's approximately $3 million. So I don't know if the developer would take the present value of those dollars in lieu of the long term, but if there was a $4 million upfront contribution rather than the long term, I think that would be something that would need to get discussed as a swapping of those dollars. The developer has just worked out their pro forma to see what works and how to make the project go. If you keep in mind, the commission did ask for additional density. So by adding 47 additional units, the price per square foot to build the thing has gone up probably anywhere between $12 and $18 million, depending on where the cost per square foot to construct lands. And those values on the cost per square foot have jumped significantly.
In the meantime.
And they continue to go. So just looking at that, they've added $15 million to their budget at our behest, at our request. And I think the developer is just trying to balance those additional costs with ultimately what they hope to be a sustaining rent once they do get constructed. So, just looking at the dollars associated with this project, it's gone from about $38 million, and now it's at $53.6 on the projected cost of the project. And that doesn't really include the circulation, the additional costs on finishes, or that fire protection that may get added into the project and things like that. So just considering the costs that have increased at some of the requests that we've made. So they've worked with us tremendously to adjust, I think.
I don't have a problem. I think that, of course, particularly, apartment financing now, you can get 95% financing. So you don't have to have a lot of equity anymore. And unfortunately, this particular owner, his family's got more money than anybody in the city of Lakeland. They can buy anybody in Lakeland, long story short. But I had an array of different issues that TIF is an issue too for me. I'd like to get some return. I'm not good for 10 years. 5 years sounds exciting to me, but I'm sure other people have questions here, but I've had a lot of emails. I'm sure you guys have too. And I just said, I'm going to wait and hear what the proposal was. And I'd like to maybe delay this another meeting or something, because there's a lot of, I'm sure we're going to get a lot of stuff coming back. But anyway, I'm sorry.
This is first reading.
Well, this is not the first reading.
I'm sorry. Actually,
This is second?
it's not a reading at all. It's just
it's a
approval of contracts.
Oh, yeah, okay. City Manager.
I'd just like to also respond to one of the questions that was asked. And I think it's just what we're seeing kind of as a sign of the times. You know, a year and a half, 2 years ago, whenever we were putting out, RFPs like this, we were requiring a certain number of affordable units. Right. And the commission started hearing from some of the local developers that, that doesn't work for the performer. And why should the city and the staff and the CRA determine what works? Because when we were requiring a specific number, they said, that they couldn't do it. So what we've changed in the process is we let them now respond to those RFPs, and they tell us. And then as part of that evaluation process, we take a look and factor in, well, who can offer the most if it works with the totality of the deal. So it's really not driven by us, that percentage that you mentioned. It's what we got back in the responses to the RFP.
I understand that.
Mr. Roos?
On that same affordable units point, Onyx, in their original proposal, offered or included 10% of the units as affordable. That's 10% of the 153 units that were originally proposed. When we reconvened after they heard from the commission in October seeking additional units, we did not hold them to increasing the number of affordable units to keep that 10% commitment, recognizing that was going to further erode their bottom line. So that's why it remained at 15 units or 10% of the original proposal.
Mr. Broussard.
Yes, to Commissioner Music and Reed's question about the parking, just logic with me for a second. If we look at the Summit garage, we transferred the sale price back to, and we call it purchase, but we long-term leased 150 spaces for a set period of time at $70 a space, and it incrementally goes up every 5 years, I think, by CPI. We didn't have to pay to build them, right? What Elise is talking about here is it would have cost us $2.6 million to build spaces, 129 spaces in that garage. Okay, minimum $2.6 million at a little over $20,000 a space, right? We're not doing that. We're contributing some money towards to bringing this residential piece in here. Different than Summit, we're able to lease those spaces back out, all of them, right, at the same amount that we're paying them right now. Or if for some reason we across the city were to raise the lease prices, we could actually make a little bit on those if he leased them all out, right? So that is, I look at that as somewhat of an offset there. Now, maybe what he does is get creative and says, okay, folks, I know you need to lease 100 spaces, but you're going to be gone nights and weekends. Your employees aren't going to be here nights and weekends. I'll give you a break. I'll sell them to you I'll rent you these things for $50 a month. Well, that's okay. For $20 a month, our cost, he could have 129 spaces available nights and weekends for our citizens to use in that area of town. So I'm just trying to help you through the math logic of why we did this deal on this piece of it. It's that piece is a good good deal.
I'm not opposed to 8 stories. I'm with Bill. I want to load if we get density downtown, that's great. And of course, 80 and I, we're always pushing for heights and stuff like that. So I don't have density is good in the city, in my opinion. And I was just making a comment about the parking they're getting. Yes. The residents are going to use all the parking at night, in my opinion. And so our general citizens, if they want to go downtown and do stuff, there's not going to be available parking at night. we haven't paid for it tonight anyway. I guess you look at it that way. But that was,
We're talking about a way to separate the public parking from the residential parking so that we don't have those conflicts in the design, and we're trying to work that through. And, we have 24 hours, 7 days a week, exclusive control of these spaces, and if they sit empty, then
That's our business.
that's right. And so we want to make sure that we have the ability to monetize these spaces, and that's something that we have made clear throughout this process. And we've really tried to negotiate as much of a net neutral to get the thing in the ground, then ultimately to be able to reap the benefits down the road from the taxables.
but it'd be interesting when we come back with a mix on what we get, or how that may attribute to those factors. But anyway,
You're asking good questions.
I've taken up too much time.
You're asking good
But-
questions.
To address a couple of your questions, one, the CRA did acquire the property from the LDDA for $100, so that's how we got the property. Two, the assignment provision is in Section 22 of the agreement, and similar to what Elise said, they have the right to assign the agreement to their principals, provided their principals are also majority owners in whichever entity takes over the contract. Outside of that, this agreement says that any assignment has to be approved by the CRA, and CRA sole discretion. And as we might choose to condition that assignment, that consent to the assignment.
It's similar to what we do in residential. We'll buy a piece and then get it all ready to develop it, and if we give it to the builder, and we're going to make $1 million spread on the difference. We keep $1 million in this company, and the developer, he's got his lots at this sale, so it's just an internal profit, but it'd be nice to, I know we can't do that, can't get a piece of it, but I was wondering if they do flip it to ABC, they're still liable for the component, I understand that.
Yeah.
But if they do, that we don't have there's no benefit to the city. It might not end up being Onyx that would be the owner at that point in time, or a subsidiary.
And again, if they assign the contract prior to closing, then we have discretion as to whether to approve that or not, unless it's to a closely related entity. If they choose to sell the property after closing, we're going to have the TIF agreement in place, which our typical TIF agreement says that it goes away upon sale. So there is an incentive built in for them to retain the property.
Then you want it to be longer, see?
Well, it'd be nice to have those units live longer than 15 years to, if they could have those units just coincide with the parking lot lease, it'd be nicer too, but I understand it's a monetary thing for them too, but I just want to bring a lot of stuff kind of out for my thoughts. So,
I'm in the queue.
That brings me apologetically to Commissioner McLeod.
Very good. Good. A couple of comments and then a few questions, Elise. Thank you for all the work that's gone into this. I know every month I've been asking Elise, how's the Oak Street project coming along? And so there are a lot of discussions, you, Brian, the team, the legal team. I think really you've covered a lot of bases and dotted the I's, crossed the T's as I look at this contract. And so just a point to make, this did have unanimous CRA board approval. And I think the comment was made that this is the kind of development we want in this part of downtown. It's a $50 million investment. And so that's exciting to see this for sure. At least will Onyx, did somebody from the team be here on Monday, I'm guessing?
Yes.
Okay. Because that was helpful at the CRA board meeting to hear from them, to hear, I know they want to get started and to move quickly. And so the terms of the extensions, we talked about that at the CRA board meeting. Any changes today from what we approved then?
So at that time, I think you all requested that we modify and reduce the extensions, which we did, and then also charge them a fee for the additional extensions.
So that fee was not in there at the CRA board meeting?
Correct. We went back and we added that in at your request.
Okay.
And that's only for closing extensions, not due diligence period extensions.
That's correct. And we have to close within 12 months of executing, so realistically, there's a potential for up to 10 extensions, all of which they would have to pay for, which would be a non-refundable amount on the extensions themselves.
The extensions would be above and beyond the 12 months, so it could close later than 12 months, but they can exercise 2 30-day extensions, and they would have to pay for the extensions.
Correct.
Beyond
thereafter.
it applies to the purchase price, so it doesn't, it's just free money.
If they decide they don't want to close, then it's our money. If they do close, the deposit and the additional extension fees are applied to the purchase price.
That was one of the comments that from the CRA board was just the feeling that maybe we were too generous on the extensions and wanted to tighten that up or put some provision in to require a fee. Hearing from the developer, though, they do, I believe they desire to get this thing moving, and it doesn't benefit them to draw it out and keep extending it. On the 2,000 square feet of retail, do we have any idea what they're paying for that?
We don't, in the conceptual, I believe it just says cafe on the plans, but we're
Just
not
curious.
fully sure.
Okay.
Any other questions? Commissioner Mann?
So the 12 months plus the extensions, does it all fall underneath the umbrella of the 36 months?
So the 36-month, I believe, is the overall construction timeline. And initially in the proposal, Onyx had a 25-month timeline, but realized that they'd like to be done in 25 months, but not understanding material availability. They wanted to build in some buffer in there to make sure that anything that was out of their control, they'd have time to be able to mitigate it.
So the 36 months will be on top of extension. So it's not necessarily 36 months from contract execution. It's 36 months from closing date, which can be extended, as we just mentioned.
It behooves them to get this out of the ground sooner.
Yes.
So.
They're aware of the costs, the cost of money as well, and so they want to get it out of the ground because the project increases by the day.
So does material, we're in a unique period of time where material costs are increasing by the day too. So there is some anticipation that the pendulum could swing in a little bit of slow delay in this, but it's a risk. And so they're committed to this, they're going to go, I would think. All right, any other comments? All right, let's then go to
utility committee, or utility, and we do have a utility committee meeting coming up at 11, so at your discretion, whether you want to take those up and hear them again at 11, or just wait till 11 for those.
At 11? 11's fine. Okay, then any comments by commissioners?
I just have a question. I've had some individuals reach out to me, and I'm not sure if anyone else has, but it's concerning easements. And it was, and I think it was a social media post that encouraged other people. So then I had my contact in there, so they reached out to me. And the scenario is I have my house in the back is some telephone poles and a fence. When I moved in here, it was being mowed and taken care of. It hasn't been for the last 8 months, and it's crazy. Who is responsible? And everybody's giving their opinion and whatnot. And I didn't really respond because I knew I could come today and kind of talk with people. So if there is a way that during the meeting, somebody, so that something's on the record out there of, hey, here's how the easements work in the city of Lakeland. Here's who, I don't own the part between my sidewalk and the street, but yet I mow it and water it and feed it and stuff like that. So people are used to the concept, but when it's part of their property that they see, but it's maybe behind a fence or something like that, I wouldn't imagine we would expect somebody to climb a fence with a weed eater and hedge something. So anyway, that was just a question that had come up to me, if there's a way that we could spend a minute to address that.
Yeah, and just to briefly answer the question, with an easement, we don't own the property, you own the property, and you have the obligation to maintain your property. Our easements typically say, like if we have electric facilities in there, that we have the right to go in there and trim the trees, or to protect our facilities in that easement. But as the property owner, you have the obligation to maintain it.
Yeah.
That's not an ideal situation if it's fenced in like that.
Yeah, and I believe the one that was fenced in did send me the address, so I can get with you specifically on that one. But
And there are one-off easements that have different terms and conditions in there, so we would need to check the specific property to see.
All right, thank you. And that was pretty much what people said. It's your property, you need to take care of it.
Right.
But okay, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner
Mayor, were you going to cover the mid-year review?
That's okay.
And I did bring that up via Tracy just to ask how we were, just for my colleagues to know, because I remember doing that this time last year. So I was wondering if we are doing mid-year reviews, what that process looked like. I wasn't sure where Dr. Ross would fit or not into that. So
let me
pass that off to you. Okay.
Yes, sir.
I'm good.
Right, so that brings me to the review of our annual review that we do for our city manager and city attorney, which is our responsibility. We did a mid-year review in 2019 because we were primarily new. And so for us, it was, as a commission, for us, it was an opportunity to come up to speed. That has historically not been the case. So the only time mid-year reviews have historically been done was the first year of that associate to try and accelerate their ability in that role, to accelerate their ability to understand what they're doing. As a practical matter, we're in the process of switching from Larry Ross to someone else to do the reviews. So in order to get that process done and in place, I had met with Commissioner Selvich and asked if that was, former Commissioner Selvich, and asked if that was something he'd be interested in, and that was originally actually done at Larry's recommendation that he would be a great candidate. And then, so he provided us with this, and that's kind of what we were waiting for. And then that so I got that to you, and so it was a timely question. The reality is, by the time we implement it, it's a year review anyway. We accelerate it a little bit if we do this plan, because we normally do that review by the end of, after the budget, as we get into the new fiscal year, so it's a little later. It's been towards the December, January kind of interval. So this would actually allow us to move it a little sooner, so it's a somewhat less, in this case, it's less than a one-year review. So the money that, the cost of it that Mr. Selvich provides is well within the reasonable and historical pattern of that process. And I gave you a copy of the contract and a copy of his timetable. Basically, if we approve him to do this on a facilitating basis, and the value, I think, too, of this as a former commissioner is that even in his interviews with each of us, that can be more helpful because he's going to have more insights even than Larry might have had, and certainly specifically. So the timeline would be that he'd start the week of August 23rd, deliver an individual summary of accomplishments 14 days prior to the first interview. We'd have interviews with the commissioners initiated no later than September 20th, follow-up one-on-one meetings October 7th, and then presentation, those we could really do in December if we wanted to, with respect to the results. November or December, because we'd have them available. That allows us then to also talk about with him, and of course he's going to use the template that Larry has used historically, so that we have comps that are historical. If you want to approve him to do this. Then after that, if we want to do something that's a 6-month review, then that's a process we would want to talk about kicking in with him right away, and also maybe a change to the survey product that in some areas that we'd like to make a recommendation of some changes. But we'd benchmark from last review to this review as we would go forward in that event. So that's the kind of overall scope. I'm wide open for comments. Commissioner McCarley.
I have a couple questions. They're kind of swirling around. Why would we have just one candidate to look at in the review process? If typically in city management, we look at 3 and not that I'm saying we need to RFP it out, but why would we limit it to 1?
We can. So all you need to do is say, we'd like somebody else to be considered and give me the suggestion. It's really my responsibility to get it done.
So, it seems like a lot of pressure on you, but also, is there a best practice? Like, are there best practices for municipalities or counties? Is there another formula like elsewhere? I mean, I know we've used Dr. Ross historically for I don't know how many years, and I think he's lovely and wonderful, but he's now retiring, so we're all having to pivot. I mean, are there best practices in the city management world of how to do this or utilizing other entities or,
It varies greatly.
Okay.
I mean, every municipality is different. I mean, it ranges from, some municipalities who don't do any type of review because certainly, within a certain number of hours, a vote of the commission can, make a change in who the city manager is.
That's a review of sorts.
So I'm just saying from one.
I prefer not to do that.
I do too. I do too. But I'm just to the point though that it scales from
Right.
that, all the way up to, a mid-year and an annual review and everything in between.
Does ICM, what's that group you're in?
ICMA?
They don't have a,
There are some resources that I can get with the mayor.
okay, can you forward those to the mayor?
Then it's just,
Just from a best practice standpoint and professional standpoint, I want this to be as positive and to have good structural feedback to help our staff do as well as they can do and be as successful as possible. So I just don't want to limit ourselves into having, one for a playbook and for a timeline. And I agree that I appreciate you looking into all of this because it is a tight timeline. And I would like to do a mid-year moving forward, and it doesn't have to be as intensive as maybe the annual. I mean, obviously using the same metrics is important, but I don't know that it needs to be like a deep dive, just sort of like a pulse check of how's everything going? How are you doing? Is there stuff you need from your, people who manage you? Is there something that's not going well? I'm just a big proponent of that in general.
And that might even be an internal survey that we manage ourselves, that we could do. So that's a product we could look at. So I'd love to look at any other input, so I'll take that. And I would certainly think that if we want to do midterm, that's something that we should address. We want to probably keep the benchmarks regardless of who it is for what we've done historically with this one. And so, and we could do this one now and then work on additional leads too. So it's just, there's no pressure time-wise for us. So we can do this longer. We've done it typically in December, January anyway. So it's just that I use that as the opportunity to make sure to make a presentation on it this morning. I had this underway, which is why we had this earlier, but.
Thank you for doing that, and thank you for asking.
Yes, yes. So no problems with it. Okay, comments?
Yeah, so I think that there's a huge benefit if we use salvage, right? I think that he brings a set of insight that could be valuable. Are the costs between the two relative? I mean, so there's no real fee concern that we have there, okay? But I certainly agree. I love that mid-year. I think that helps, especially as a new commissioner, right?
That's why we did it.
It gave me something that I was like, okay, now for the year end, my mind is gearing in the right direction, and we're going to have that every couple of years. So
Agree.
And plus, if there's something that we're really struggling with, I want them to know.
Right.
Before the end of the year, say, so now, as opposed to being able to correct mid-ship, you've got,
So we should probably work to try and create some mid-year mechanism as we go.
Okay.
This would be, so let me look at what Assistant City Manager Cologne provides, look at some of the other options that we have. We could even consider doing a salvage initial option on this
Like
one.
stopgap,
and then talk about going forward too. But let's all decide that together.
Yeah.
I'll bring everything back to you. Okay?
And I like that as an option too.
Okay.
Summed up my thoughts. That's good. I'm out.
Thank you. Anything else? All right, then we are adjourned. And we have,
We're meeting in the
commission
room until
30 minutes?
37.